Hello and welcome to our Saturday Live. Thank you for joining us for the session and, of course, to Ad Gully also for partnering with us for the session. In today's session, we discuss podcasts and the association of this medium with PR. Without a doubt, podcasts are one of the fastest growing media platforms. This reminds me of when blogs came around. The podcast is very much where the blog or the web blog was at the turn of the century. It's perceived as cool. Every client wanted to be on a cool blog at that point of time. Podcasts are exactly in that sweet spot right now. They don't need a hard sell to clients and prospects of PR services, as they are now increasingly themselves demanding podcasting in the communication mix. While these are an exciting section to explore for PR and communication professionals and add to their campaigns, but do we know enough about it? How does it fit into a PR campaign? Will it have a real impact? What are the numbers? What do podcasters expect from the PR community? To answer this and more, we have with us today Silawath Irshad, host of the Growth Mindset podcast. In his podcast, he interviews industry leaders across the world as they share practical tips for listeners that can help them achieve their dreams and goals in life. His podcast has also been ranked as one of the top 5 podcasts in India by Apple Podcast. An NLP practitioner, master practitioner, he understands what it takes to produce a fabulous podcast. So, without much ado, let's add him on the chat. Hi, Irshad, how are you doing?
Hi, Tarunjit. I'm doing good. How are you?
Very good. So, before we, take a deep dive into the world of podcasting, tell us a little
Mhm.
bit about yourself and how you got started into this and made it into a full-time profession.
Yeah. See, I've been in this personal development field for quite some time now. It's been close to 7 years that I've always been working on myself. Typically, let me just give you a quick background for people who are here right now. So I'm
Right.
typically from Rajasthan, right? My dad was born in Rajasthan. I was born and brought up in Mumbai, and then it's been close to 14 years that we've been in Bangalore, right?
Right.
Apart from this, I've done my engineering, and engineering. I realized that coding and having a full time job isn't my thing. I realized that at an early age. But after
Uh,
I graduated, I had a job in sales when I was
right.
working as a sales manager, selling to clients and stuff like that. But during that process, I also knew that I had to start something of my own, something which wasn't there in the market. They say, right, product market fit. So I
Right.
was looking always at opportunities that I could do something which could have a real impact out there, that I could contribute in a way. And then after 7 years of continuous learning, growing, doing this, NLP courses, reading books, attending seminars, I saw that there is a room for podcasting. Podcasting in the US is a big thing. But in India, I realized that this is at very nascent stages. It's not even have they say, right, a baby is not even born yet. It's the mother is pregnant, but it has not delivered the baby. So I realized that this is a very niche and a very interesting market which has the potential to boom in coming years in India.
Hmm.
So that's what got me into podcasting industry, and I started this a year ago, back in 2019, right? And gracefully, the kind of people that I've interviewed have been some of the best in the industry when it comes to be it singers, writers, authors, travel bloggers. I basically interview everybody from all the different industries, and they
Okay.
share their practical tips, because I wanted my podcast to talk about something that help people improve the quality of their lives. Now, podcast has different varieties. There are poetry based, drama, horror, sci-fi, anything, name it, and you have podcast genres like that. So I
Right.
decided that my niche itself help self improvement, and then I worked on it. Gracefully, I've been able to interview some really interesting people in the world, and which has got me today to the place where I am today, right? Ranking one of the top 5 podcasts and still reaching out to more and more amazing people, interacting with them and trying to create a good impact. So that's what I'm all about, and my podcast is all about.
I mean, that's a fabulous journey. So, for the benefit of our viewers right now, can you first help us define a
Mhm.
podcast? One? And what are the different genres, or let's say, what are the different terminologies that are used to define it? I have been speaking to a lot of
Mhm.
podcasters last, I think for a year or so, and everybody looks at
Okay.
define differently. Yeah, how would you define it?
Correct. Sure. So see, podcasting, as the name suggests, right? Today we have multiple forms of media. Where we have, you could say, YouTube. People can go to YouTube videos they can watch, and one of the closest thing that you can relate podcast to is basically the radios, right? It is nothing but something, a voice over internet. That is podcast, voice over internet, like how we have YouTube. That's it,
Right.
video over internet. Same thing we have is over here. Good thing about podcasting, how I like to define it, is something, it's like a buddy of yours, right? You don't need to sit in front of a computer trying to watch a video file for 2 hours or an hour. You can
Right.
keep, or let's say, play a music wherever you are. It's just like playing a music also, right? You see, look at these apps today. We have Spotify, Geo7. What are they doing? They are just providing you voice over
Right.
internet. Podcast is
Correct.
the same thing. It provides you voice over internet, and then you can choose the genre what you want. So if you are a person,
Mm.
let's say, who likes poetry, you will find a lot of podcasts that talk about poetry, that basically do poetry. If you like something as comedy, there's an amazing person, Cyrus, right? Cyrus says he has a podcast based on comedy. So name any industry, and you have a podcast already from that space. That is why.
So,
Hmm,
so,
tell me.
so, do you have to have a certain kind of, it's very different from the other mediums, right?
Hmm,
I remember when we were children, there used to be movies on the
yeah,
radio. Yeah. Or,
correct.
yes, I'm that old. I
Correct.
do remember, the movie Anand, the cassettes were really possible, were really popular at that point of time. So, does podcasting require a certain amount of, a unique talent, or does it require a melodious voice for you to be able to host one?
Hmm. Okay, so as good it may sound, or people may say you need a talent or a skill. I personally don't believe that. For me, it's more to do with, are you really passionate about what you want to do? If you're really passionate towards what you want to do, you will find out ways to improve yourself. See, nobody's perfect. For instance, let's say Joe Rogan podcast. Okay, now Joe Rogan
Right.
podcast in the world is the number one podcast today. Okay. Now that guy, I wouldn't say he has the most melodious voice in the world, the most handsome guy. He's not, but he's real. He is what he is. And when you're
Right.
real and when you're honest, right, and when you're really passionate about what you do, people will cling on to you. People will follow you automatically. People will like your content. And obviously, you don't have to make sure that everybody in the world listens to your podcast. You can't, reach out to everybody and all audiences. People who
Right.
like the kind of work will actually find you. So the most important thing, rather than having a melodious voice or having a great presentation, because obviously you need that, to go to the next
Right.
level. But the initial phases is the more important factor is, are you really passionate about what value you're gonna add to the society and to the people around you. And then comes improving yourself, becoming a better presenter, maybe doing online courses, because I do that. I still talk to a lot of mentors that I have that are great in communication skills. I talk to them, I learn what I could do, what kind of better questions I could ask. You see, I have multiple books here and I have many more. They all talk about how to be a better communicator, because you always want to improve, right? You don't want to be the same
Correct.
person. That also plays a
Correct.
very important role.
So, I think, while podcasting is still a very nascent industry in India, the lockdown, I think, has given it a major boost because a lot of people, are now tuning in to listen to things. I think
Yeah.
watching news or reading news has become a little bit more overwhelming for them, and they're choosing to go to podcasts. What is your view on how you see this industry, moving ahead in the next couple of years?
Okay. See, that's a very good question, actually. I'll just give statistics because I'm somebody who likes giving facts and figures, and I'm very practical also in my approach. So, if you go back in time, let's say 2013 or 2015, 2016, that year was the year when people were, the word podcasting had just come to India. It wasn't very famous. A lot of people did not know it, but they knew there's something called as podcasting. But after a few years, right, by a statistics in 2018, it is said that India had around close to 20 million listeners out of the 500 million population that we have, active listeners who are on the internet. But the good thing is, every year after that, every year after 2018, It is growing at a rapid speed at 58% every year. Today we have,
Wow.
yeah. So last year, as per the records by PwC, their research, they said that India has close to 40 million listeners, active listeners today, out of 500. So if we do the math, again, 50% would increase. That means 20 million more would be added this year, which would be 60 million. The next year it would be 80, and the year after that it's going to be 100. So in the next 5 or 10 years, I can tell you that podcast is going to dominate the audio space. As we see radio today, radio is taking a hit. That is the reason why you're seeing a lot of, Geo, Spotify. Spotify invested $500 million in podcasting. 500
Right.
million dollars is a huge amount. Why are they doing this? Because they know after 5 or 10 years, India is going to be the biggest space because of the population we have and the kind of leaders that are coming up today. If you see that, it's the direct correlation between the entrepreneur and the startup space that is rising in India and the people's hunger to growth and how they want to learn and grow. And podcast is the best way, because if you're commuting or you're in the gym or if you're home at cooking, you can just play podcast and do your work simultaneously. At the same time, you're learning good stuff, right? So in the next 5 or 10 years, I no, this is what I like to call it. It is just a baby that is born yet. It's just 15 days old. After 10 or 15 years, you look at him, he's gonna grow into a teenager and a big mature person at 15 or 20 years. Then people, who are starting off today at an early stage, or maybe people have already started the podcast, if they're consistent, podcast leaders are going to be the next big think leaders. For example, you see Jay Shetty today, you see Tom
Yeah.
Bilyeu today, Gary Vee today. What does these people have in common? They are leaders, and second, they all have a podcast when they're interviewing leaders. So 15, 20 years from now, the podcast guys, the podcast hosts who are actually doing good and impacting people in a better way are going to be
Right.
the leaders for tomorrow in coming years.
So let's move to the branding, marketing, and PR sphere.
Mhm.
Uh, what is would like to hear your views on how you think that, let's say, a particular brand or a particular individual can look at podcasting for brand building.
Hmm. Definitely. So see, there are a couple of ways as to how I look at it personally, right? Uh, Now, obviously, when companies reach out to PR agencies, they want to make a good brand. Now, if PR agency want to actually provide a good, outcome or a good result to people, what they'll have to do is they'll have to identify people that have standards. Now, if you go in the world today, there are close to 9 lakh podcasts out there. 9
Right.
lakh is a lot of podcasts. In India, we
Right.
have close to 2 lakhs podcasts, out of which 50% are not even active. They've just started their work, but end of the day, they've just left it at some place. So if you
I
see,
guess it takes a lot of consistency and effort and
definitely,
perseverance. Uh,
definitely.
the podcast.
And podcasting at the initial stages, right? People who start a podcast is not something that you put today and then you're boom, you're a celebrity the next day. It doesn't work that. It's like a consistent effort and the kind of caliber and the standard a particular podcast host keeps for getting the brand. Now, if you wanna, let's say, work with Nike does not go and reach out to some a person who's struggling to make a career in cricket or somebody, right? They go with people like who are at the top, like Virat Kohli or let's say Yuvraj Singh. Why are they doing it? Because they want people at that level. They want to make sure that they're doing something good. For PR agents, if they want to actually build a good brand for the organization, which basically is the reason why companies reach out to PR agencies, is for them to understand which are the right podcasting mediums and which are the right podcasts that are growing in the space or that have already grown in the space, right? And then identifying if that particular podcast is gonna add real value to that particular customer of yours, right? See, there are a lot of places where a particular podcast host may not be a right fit for a specific company. Let's say,
Correct.
we talk about a company that is into IT, right?
Yeah.
You go and try to promote that into, let's say, a podcast which is purely on poetry. It doesn't make sense, right? You have to identify, exactly, you have to identify the right podcast, a podcast that is in the business space, that is doing great, and also understand what are the kind of guests that are coming on the podcast. See, on
Correct.
podcasts, that is on how people basically promote companies or brands, or how podcasters are promoting it. First is either they could put a promo saying this, this podcast is brought to you by X and X company. What is
Right.
happening? Now, people who are listening to podcasts, right, are basically not somebody who are just there for fun. These guys are
Right.
highly educated and, influencers in their own spaces, leaders in their own spaces. That is why they're able to know, and these guys are, are basically the decision makers. So if you're, what do you guys want? You guys basically want the decision makers to know more about that particular brand or that company. So the
Correct.
best, podcast, why I also say is one of the best mediums, is because you're directly reaching out to owners. For instance, my listeners are anywhere between the age of 25 and 45. And these are, almost 90% of them are either entrepreneurs or business leaders. So these are already the decision makers of companies who have a team of 100, 200, 500, 600 people working under them.
Hmm.
And when they
Hmm.
hear about a specific brand or a company and what value they're trying to add, the chances
Hmm.
of that brand or that positioning, right, whatever we position, increases
Right.
tenfold, because you're getting hold of the right people at the right time. That's the power of podcasting.
Understood. Thank you for clarifying that. Now,
Mhm.
what would be your advice for PR professionals on how they would like to, or how should they differentiate it from others? For example, television or live sessions. This is a common complaint, or rather common refrain that I've heard from a lot of podcasters, that a lot of PR professionals give them the same pitches as they would for a television channel, right? What would be your advice in terms of, let's say, what do you look for when you receive a PR pitch?
Cool. So yeah, that's very true. The kind of request I get on a regular basis, this happens every day. Every day, at least I get like 2 or 3 requests from PR agencies saying, we have this specific guest. This is the company owner. Would you like to connect with them and talk to them? And it's very vague in nature. I mean, if you're reaching out to somebody, that something that I expect is for you at least have a background as to what kind of people that I've hosted, what kind of work that I do, so that because what is basically happening that I've observed, because I have a lot of friends in media industry, the same forward, the same email that they send to 10 different people who are in the video agency or in the video space, some in the radio space, the same forward is coming to me as well. And I'm like, okay, like at least I understand, what this person, because everybody operates different, and the way we operate is also totally different. Podcasting is a totally different industry, right? It's different.
What if you have to define it, right? What are the three things that you look for when you get a PR pitch?
First thing, I look at a person, who's reaching out to me, and I tell my team, as soon as somebody, I get an email. I have given access to my 2 teammates as well, so they fetch this, they filter that out. They check the profile of the company first, going through all the social media platforms. Then
Right.
basically, they will research the person that they're trying to pitch. For instance, let's say if it's a company owner, then I will try to tell them, get me more information about the company owner. What does that person do? What does the company do? And does that align with what I want to do? So my team knows that I'm more towards making sure a message goes out, a message that actually inspires people and gives practical tips. That are the kind of people that I want to associate with. That's why most of the things I say no to when I get requests, because it's not possible for me to host everybody. So I try to understand if that particular person is actually interested in giving a message or just promoting a brand, right? So there are two different things. Both of these things should go hand in hand, promoting the brand as well as giving a message. If both of these things go hand in hand, and the company is doing great, company is growing, it already has an established brand, then I like to
Right.
work with them, because people know about them. It makes my life also easier, right?
Right.
And then I also expect from PR agencies to also promote this as much as possible, because end of the day, if you're not promoting, we're not doing anything, right? It's like winking a girl in the dark, wherein the girl would have no idea what is happening, and then you have no idea what is happening either, right? So handing hand or joining hands in making sure that that message reaches out to maximum people, like sharing it in the company's profile, sharing it in the PRP agency profile. Then I basically share it. So it's a constant effort, wherein it's not just one time effort. Once I start working with the PR agency, it's like a a handshake, wherein I'm helping them grow the brand, grow the company, and at the same time I am also growing. Right? That's when all of us win. The listeners are winning, brands are winning, and I'm winning. So that's what I look out for when people reach out to me from PR agencies.
Okay. So we've started getting in a lot of questions from our audiences. We'll start taking a few of them
Sure.
now. Uh, Tell us about any recent campaign that you partnered with a PR team. How did you plan a desirable outcome?
Okay, so there are a lot. So I'll talk about the one that I personally loved. One of the best experiences was obviously with your team. When when I basically spoke to Nikhil from Zolo Stage. So when I interacted
Right.
with him, right, while I was interviewing, I really got the feeling that that person really wanted to contribute. That person would really had that desire to give a message out to the people that would inspire a lot of other individuals to go after their dreams. And he was very honest about how he started Zolo Stage and how he growed that company. And if you know, that company just raised $100 million again in a few weeks, and that's amazing. That's the kind
Correct.
of people that I like to interview, because these guys are genuine in their approach. And for the first time, he also told on my podcast that he's gonna donate all his money. I mean, like, almost 95% of his money. So that kind of upfrontness, and people coming forward and being genuine about what they are, real about
Right.
what they are, the message they spread are is actually what I look for. So basically, I would say your company has been great. There's another one. It's called Mirabis Inc., which is again a nice. I deal with 2 or 3 people from there. They're also really nice, very understanding. So when when they reach out to me for anything, I try to accommodate their request also. So it's not
Right.
possible for me to host everybody on the podcast. What I do sometimes, I do live sessions. So
Right.
since my Instagram is booming right now, I try to, okay, why don't you come here and introduce yourself, pitch in your brand if you're an entrepreneur. Let's take it forward. Now I'm
Hmm.
starting with another segment for entrepreneurs only in the podcast, which would
Right.
normally have all the entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs that want to make their name out, how they can collaborate with me and make sure that they go to the next level. So I would say you two guys have been a treat to work with.
Thank you so much. I think my team will be delighted to hear that.
Yeah, you have a great team. I must say that that they're really nice.
Thank you. Another question from one of our audiences. Do you think this sector works best for, let's say, certain kinds of medium? For example, fashion, is a more visual medium. Would you want to get fashion entrepreneurs or, let's say, designers on your podcast? Will that make sense for would that segment make sense for a podcast?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I said, right, every segment, I'm trailing this out aloud for PR agencies who are not concentrating on podcast. After 5 or 10 years, this is going to be the next big thing. So the kind
Right,
of contacts you're gonna make today with podcast hosts who are rising or already at the top are gonna reap you rewards tenfolds after 5 or 10 years. Because if you build a relationship with them, they're gonna help you promote the kind of brands you want, or one or the other way, they're gonna help you for sure. So every industry matters a lot. For instance, let's say my self-help podcast, I don't specifically focus on only one specific industry, right? I get people from all the industry. I get it
correct,
from I get singers. I'm also involved with a few fashion designers. There are like, name any specific industry, like actors. They're
right,
already there on the
correct,
podcast, right? Why am I doing this? Because I want to cater to people that have the mindset where they want to learn. That's my business, right? That's the focus that I want to have. So based on what focus different podcasters have and what PR agencies wants to into. That's why I said, when you asked, right, how should PR agencies reach out to podcasters? Identify
right,
what kind of host are they getting. Are they getting a host that you have in mind, like your brand? Are they the same kind of host? Because the probability of you would increase if the particular podcast host is hosting the guys like your brands or your companies you're working with. If you reach out to me with somebody who's a business leader in an amazing field and has a great authority, I would definitely interview them. Why not? But if you
right.
go to a person who's doing a poetry podcast, and if you tell him go interview a business leader, that wouldn't resonate with them. It'll waste both of their times.
Completely understand. I think that is one of the basics that we try and accommodate in PR. It has to always be about the final audience that the medium is catering to. So
Correct.
in this time, as one of our viewers puts it, goldfish attention spans. How do you think listener attention can be kept?
Okay. So there are, see, it's a very good question. But again, keeping attention is gonna be totally different from somebody who really wants to grow and learn. Okay. Let me elaborate. So I can hold somebody's attention through science. Okay, this is science-based figures. a man can only, or a woman can basically concentrate for maximum of 25 to 30 minutes on a podcast. My
Hmm.
podcast are anywhere between even 45 minutes, sometimes, and sometimes below 30, sometimes to an hour extent, depends on what kind of conversations I have.
Hmm.
Now, how to keep attention? First thing, keep it real. I mean, that's the most important thing. If you're
Correct.
just trying to get attention of people, like how TV advertisements do, or like news channels do, you understand, they give you a great headline, but when you go into the content, you realize, oh my god, this is such a waste of time. The same thing happens with podcast. Let's say if somebody is putting an amazing name for a specific interview, and the guy comes into that podcast, listens to the interview, and he's like, damn, the podcast name, what the guy was promoting and what it is totally different. So making sure that the alignment of that specific, whatever the name of the podcast is, the interview is keeping at the same level, and being genuine and honest at what conversation you're having. If you want to build a
Correct.
brand only, you don't care about creating an impact or spreading a message, it's fine, be honest about it, because people who are really interested in building brands will listen to that podcast interview anyways. And if you have a
Correct.
listener base, for instance, like say if I have a listener base, which I do, if they have a listener base, people will automatically listen to the podcast. Why? Because I've maintained a standard and the kind of people that I interview. So it's like an authority. When people are listening to my podcast, they know, okay, so these guys, this Irshad, whenever he interviews, he'll interview with intention of giving the best, getting the best out of those, leaders. And I ask them questions which help them reveal the trade secrets of their success, right?
Right.
So they stick to the end of the interview. So this will
Right.
take time, because once you build a brand and an authority in space, is when people will listen to your 1 hour or even 2 hours of interview if they have to. They'll break it down, but they'll listen. But again,
Listen to it.
30
Yeah.
minutes, I would say, is a very good window for anybody to keep a track, especially when it comes to podcast industry.
So 30 minutes is the sweet spot.
Yeah, that's a sweet spot. Correct.
So
Correct.
let's when individuals versus brands. Brands are currently still exploring podcasts as an industry. What
So
are done? This is a 2 point question. Have you done any brand collaborations in the past, and what have been the best ones that you've done? And what are the do's and don'ts for brands who want to approach a podcaster for a collaboration?
okay, cool. See, now when it comes to brands, right? It depends on which brand goes out to the specific podcaster. I've had a few brands, but my intention is not to work with a brand in specific, because I want to have control over the kind of work that I do. So my particular specific focus, there are people that I know, podcasters that want to work with brands, and they've not been approached yet. But when they do, they're gonna work with them, right? So basically, if a brand wants to work with a podcaster, they obviously have to reach out to them and tell them their intention. And one
Right.
biggest mistake that I've seen brands kind of make today is, they want to get control of a podcast and the content. I mean, that is not going to happen to somebody, who's like me, and, who actually has a bigger vision towards the podcast, because I'm not just concentrating on, making a business out of podcast, but my main intention is to create an impact. So for me,
Right.
the kind of content I create, the kind of leaders that I interact with, I have my own set of questions that would help the listeners to make sense of,
Right.
what is the conversation? Why is Irshad asking that question? Because when I ask a question, let's say when I interviewed Neil Patel, right, who's the
Yeah,
world's
I
number
heard.
one marketing expert. So when I
Awesome.
interviewed him, yeah, I asked him questions as to what can people do to become better marketers? How can
Right.
brands come out forward and lead? How can they rank number one in SEOs? You see, the kind of questions I was crafting was more towards to do with marketing, and
Right.
entrepreneurs were listening to it. After I published that episode, I got a lot of amazing feedback saying, the steps and the practical steps that Neil gave was amazing. Now I could make it a motivational podcast, right? That is also
Right.
possible, but I don't want to keep that in mind. So the main focus that I try to do is give practical tips. So brands, if you want to make attach with somebody, just make
Right.
sure that just make sure that you tell the podcaster that we will work and accommodate you, rather than we trying to tell what kind of content, because then the podcaster would move out from his own space, and then he would not have the real sense as to why the particular brand reached out to that particular person in the first place. So giving that
Right.
authority, and obviously since you're collaborating, you would also need some to and fro conversation. But yeah, finding a common ground, and making sure that podcasters also get that power in their hands, and then those brands also get. So that will be a win-win situation, and this is going to be the game changer in the next 5 years. I can assure you, as I said again and again, this is going to be very big in the next 5 years.
So tell me, when, let's say, when, bloggers came into the space, or when Instagrammers came into the space, there was a point where they all fell prey to number game, right?
Yeah.
What is the statistics? What is the mileage that I would get for, collaborating with a certain blogger or an Instagrammer? Is it the same podcasting industry when brands or PR agencies approach you for a collaboration?
Yeah, so that happens at times. If I tell you that it is not a numbers game, I'd be lying, and I'm not that. I'm very upfront and honest about things. Yes, you
We would
do need numbers.
be honest about that.
Yeah, you do need numbers, and because if you don't have numbers to back it up, because the numbers will help you define how is the podcast doing and how are you performing as an individual and the kind of impact you're having on people. So when I started my podcast, I still remember the first episode, though that is an amazing, but my first episode had around 150 listens, 150 people just listening to it. Though that's an amazing people, if somebody's listening, if you have a listener base or even 50 active listeners who are listening to your podcast as soon as you upload, that's a good one. You're performing actually 50% better than all the other podcasters in India. That's how niche it is at the moment. And I got 150. That was a great thing, right? And now it has 5,000, 15,000 listeners I get. Why is that happening? Because I was consistent in my plan as to what exactly I have to do and the kind of impact I want to have with my messages, right?
Right,
So making sure of that, I think, would give a great benefit to everybody out there. So
right,
keep a focus on that. Keep a focus on the number of listens. That is very important. But after a certain point of time, right? Let's say after let it be Instagram also. Now, if a podcaster wants to become an influencer, obviously Instagram handles would come in picture, Facebook page would come in picture. All this would come. All this has to go hand in hand, because see,
right.
this is a strategy which was, Neil also told me that when a brand listens to you or when people listen to you 7 times in a row, right, your probability of becoming a leader are much more higher. So go all fields. Yeah, go all fields. Go YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, everywhere. Be everywhere as possible. But don't just focus on numbers, because if you just focus on numbers, you're gonna move away from your core values and why you started that. So keep your first thing, your values and your message first, and then at the same side, a little behind, keep the numbers also. Keep a track of numbers, because that will help you understand how you're growing. And after a space of time, right? Let's say once you have 500k followers or you have 500k listeners, that doesn't matter after that. After that, that number game will not matter to you, because after that,
Mhm.
it's just about your content and continuously adding value to the listeners. That's all that matters. So only up to a point of time that number game matters.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what are the, let's say, what are the challenges that you face while, let's say, procuring a collaboration? And second, when, let's say, specifically for the PR industry, there are some elements I'm sure that you will consider as paid and versus some as barter, right? What are those distinctions? How do you consider when you look at a proposal? How do you decide that this should be this will be a great collaboration, barter collaboration, or this would be a great paid collaboration?
Hmm. So that's a very good question. What I've heard, what basically I'm kind of facing today. So as I get requests, right, on emails or Instagram or Facebook, and people try to reach out to me and say, I have this and this person who wants to be on the show. As I said, I have a team that basically fetches and filters them out, and then they tell me. So I have a very very straightforward approach. If a person is already an influencer in the space, who's already known as a thought leader, right, and has a great the way he's impacting people and people know that particular person, that's a collaboration for me, wherein I don't have to be keep it paid. I don't want to do that, because end of the day, my goal is to collaborate with leaders and spread a message. That's the main intent of my podcast, right?
Right,
But again, with goodwill also, you just can't create a business or promote it to the extent, because even podcasting takes a lot of money. You have
correct.
gadgets, you have website, you have team members that you gotta pay. There are people who edit your podcast, there are people who create posters for your events after you do that. So that's when even I realized that making money through podcast is also important. So when I look at it, if a person is already a well-established thought leader, let's say people like Seth Godin or people like Neil Patel or let's say Kamya Jani, I don't have to talk about paid promotions because they're already famous. They already are
Right.
impacting people on a global scale. Me trying to charge them doesn't make sense. That'd be stupidity at my end. So I don't do that, right? I collaborate with them, make sure that both of us have a win-win situation. Where in that company, let's say Kamya Jani, when I interviewed her, we normally share all those podcasting links on our Instagram page, Facebook page, so that people know about it. And then I promote it from my angle. So that she also gets to reach out to more people. I also get to reach out to more people through each other's network, right? That's how it works. First thing is that when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to paid, there are a couple of ways normally, and as to how I look at it. Either it could be promotions, though I try to avoid that because I want to keep that content. When I interview, I don't like to, at the moment, I don't like to, put a promotion there saying, this episode is brought to you by this and this or this. Not at the moment because maybe the kind of offers I've got are not that compelling that I would like to introduce that into my podcasting episode per se. But another way of doing this is when I see there is somebody like an entrepreneur who's doing amazing work, the work is nice, but they're at a growing stage or at a startup stage. There are times when, if I see a room for negotiation, let's say, I would say, okay, let's do this. I would charge you an X amount, and then, we can partner together, spread this thing
Right.
out, spread more word about you. This way, I also win, you also win, right? I pay my
Right.
guys who are editing the podcast for me because each episode that, let's say if it's an hour or 30-minute episode, that easily takes up to 4 to 5 hours of editing. That's a day's work of a person properly
Correct.
sitting and editing the podcast. So there is team involved, there are people involved. So to keep that in mind, that's the kind of, how I differentiate people. There are podcasters who don't charge at all. There are people who charge at all. So I keep it myself in the between. And based on the profile I get and based on the kind of message we can bring out, I take it forward like that.
So, we are getting a lot of questions on starting a podcast. So I'm gonna, steer the conversation a little bit on that end. What would be
Mhm.
your advice for somebody who is looking at starting a podcast at this point?
That's a very good question. Today I would tell you at least 7 messages. I've seen this pattern every single day is what I get as to how to start a podcast. That is something that's common today. Everybody wants to get in podcast because people are hearing, this is gonna grow. But
Right.
before starting a podcast, ask yourself, is this your passion in the first place? Right? Because podcasting will take all your energy, it will take all the efforts that you have. It will take, like literally it's a work. When you say 4 or 5 hours and then you have to research, if you're going for an interview, you got to research about a specific person, what kind of questions you're going to ask. So there's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be full-time work for you. If you want to start a podcast first, there are a couple of checklists that you need to do. First thing is you need to get your equipments right. When I say equipments, since it is voice, right, the main important focus has to be how your voice comes across and the voice of your guest would come across. So use of professional mics are important. Microphones, there are many out there. Based on the kind of budget you have, I would say start off small. If you think you don't have money at all, there's a very great platform called as Anchor, wherein you can, with your mobile phone, you can start recording and start a podcast. I started it that way. So before I delved into getting professional microphones at the first instant itself, I started recording using my phone. Get Anchor app, you can sit and start recording phone. Based, and again, remember why you are starting it in the first place. What kind of genre you want to get into, because that will define your growth and success in the coming months and years, right?
Right.
So first, it's very simple to start a podcast. If you just want to start a podcast, just get obviously you have a phone, install the Anchor app and start using it. Good to go,
Right.
right? It'll automatically also distribute your platforms to all the different channels also, like Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast. It'll distribute to all the different platforms. Second, but if you want to become a professional podcaster, wherein you are well known in this space, then you need some equipments and gadgets in real, like
Right.
microphones. You need a good headset when you're talking because you want to listen to them properly, good microphones, and then basically, an audio interface as well, because directly when you're talking versus if you have an audio interface connected to the laptop, so there are professional gadgets involved if you want to if you become that. So let's say today when I train people on how to start a podcast, because I train at least like 15 people at least a week on how to
Right.
start a podcast, how they can at least just start a podcast initially. what are the
Right.
checklists, what target audience they need to focus on, what should be the strategy towards growing the podcast, right? So that is something that I discuss. So if you want to start a podcast, very simple, download the Anchor app for free, try it out, see if that is something that you really enjoy. If you're not
Right.
enjoying it, do something that you really enjoy and you'll eventually find success end of the day.
Brilliant. I mean, that's, I think, one of the core rules, core values
True.
that you do for any business that you start, right? So, if some
100%.
viewers would want to, reach out to you to enroll in the podcasting course that you mentioned, what would be the best way to reach out to you?
So right now I'm working on my website. So you can go to my website. It's going to be www.silawathirshad.com, wherein
Right.
I'm gonna put on all the courses there as well. It should be live in 7 or 10 days from now. A second thing could be you could directly email me, Irshad. That's IRSHAD 7795 at gmail.com. So you can just send me saying you'd like to become like to train as to how you can start a podcast, and based on our conversation, see, I need to understand as to why a person is starting the podcast. So it's not like
Right.
I go ahead and just train everybody. I mean, my time is also very limited, so I want to make sure that people that I kind of work along with or train with have this desire of doing something out of podcast, and they have a message or something that they really want to contribute. That's when I join hands with them and work with them. It's a 4 week podcast. Every Saturday I do it 1 hour, wherein I sit and devise an entire plan as to how they can start a podcast, what are the equipments required, and how they can even target this to grow this podcast in coming months. So that's the best way. Send me an email. That should do it.
So, I'm sure after this, you will get a lot of requests to train people in the kind of
I
podcast
hope, yeah, I
start.
hope that I add value, and the main intention is again the kind of impact you're gonna have. So it's not about me. If you're really
Yeah.
serious about starting a podcast, I can tell you how I grow, how I've grown, and how I'm growing today, and then you can
Right.
implement this. Because the more podcasting as a community grows, everybody wins. It's not just one
Right.
person winning at the top or standing as a pyramid. No, it has to be a ground where all of us are together and trying to create a better world. That's my whole intention.
Brilliant. That's a very nice thought. What are your best, recommended platforms for hosting a podcast?
Okay, so see, there are a couple of places where you can host a podcast. There are paid, platforms, like you could go to SoundCloud. There are a couple of more. Blueberry, I've forgotten. But the best platform that I personally found, this is something that even I use, is Anchor. It's free. You don't have to worry about anything, and then they give you the control also, right? For instance, they'll give you the entire room, and then if you are also if you want to later
Right.
after a point of time decide that you've grown up to a great extent and people are reaching out to you, you can create your website, and then using the RSI link, and you can just map those directly to your website so that people can directly be routed to your website. One of the best platform, again, obviously, as I said, is Anchor for you to host. Now there are a couple of other platforms that people listen to the most. For instance, Apple Podcast, that's the leader today. So if you have a podcast, you must have your channel on Apple Podcast. That's the number one podcasting space again. Another channel that you need to focus on is Spotify. That's the second largest in the world today, right? And then third is Google Podcast. In India, Google themselves said that Google Podcast, which is their application, is like one of top 5 in the world, right? So Indians are actually adopting Google Podcast a lot, and then
Right.
listening to podcasts. So people on a global scale, especially in India, are picking up podcasts. So if you wanna grow today, and especially for brands also, this is very important. If they start their own podcast, they can actually promote themselves also. There's something that again depends on them. If they want to start
Right.
a podcast, they can either collaborate with a podcast host and tell them, why don't you host a podcast for us? We can give you X amount, or we can give you something else,
Right.
anything in return. That's another good way to have control of the. Let's say if it's a company, let's say you want to start a podcast, you can have your own podcast and get maybe a host for yourself, or have somebody host for you. You yourself can host. Different ways as to how you can do that. Or if you don't want the burden of even editing and get, because this again is a whole medium in itself. You gotta work, you gotta meet people. Then you can reach
Right.
out to professional broadcasters, and then they can help you out.
So, are there distribution platforms in podcasting industry? Like you mentioned Anchor, and I know there is one Hubhopper, right?
Yes.
Are distribution platforms available that reach out to, let's say, that distribute the podcast directly to Spotify, Google, Apple, and all the other channels that you mentioned?
So Anchor is one of them. It is a
Right.
distribution platform automatically. So it does not distribute to all the available platforms. So
Mhm.
Anchor is basically acquired by Spotify. Okay, so for
Oh,
people who might not know, yeah. So Spotify has acquired that. That's why they have spent, right. They had a budget of 500 million. I mean, like, imagine, they paid $100 million to Joe Rogan's podcast, which is the number one podcast in the world. $100 million. Imagine,
well,
that's like 75,000 or 7,500 crores, 75,000 crores. I mean, like that, I don't know what the count. I mean, like, I've lost the count. That much
right,
amount of money they have spent to get, just partner with them. And now today, Geo7 or, every, big music platform hosting, or anybody who's on audio interface are getting
right,
into podcast, because they know after 5 or 10 years this is going to be big in space.
correct.
Radio, it's an amazing platform, but again, it is deteriorating because there's a lot of advertisement, and there's too much energy, wherein
Hmm.
leaders who actually want to learn, or they want to interact with leaders, they are not moved. The moment 9 o'clock, first of all, in the traffic, and the over enthusiastic host comes in and introduces themselves, they turn him like, what is this guy talking, right? So podcast
Right.
is going to be a very important phase in the coming years. People have already started, are reaping rewards of it
Hmm.
gracefully, and people who will start can also do it, if as soon as far as they are also being very grounded, and following their work that they have to do. So Anchor is a distribution platform. But again, as I said, right, there is APIs available, there are RSI feeds available. All you gotta do is just go to different platforms, link that RSI feed, and then your channel is also gonna be on Spotify, or it's gonna be on different platforms. So don't worry about distribution platform. The first important thing is for you to start off your podcast. So start your podcast. That's what I would say.
Awesome. I'm sure a lot of people will be inspired to do that. So tell me your, top five binge-worthy podcasts from all across the world.
Okay.
What do you recommend?
So today, what happens is, I'm not able to listen to a lot of podcasts because my time basically goes a lot in my own podcast. And normally I
Right.
try to listen to my own podcast because I try to understand how am I talking, and was I able to get all the information I wanted from that specific guy, right? For instance, when you're talking to, let's say, world-class leaders like, let's say, Seth Godin or Neil Patel, uh, you might get that inferiority complex at times, like, he's a great guy, how will I ask him those questions, but
Right.
to become a communicator, and to find that rapport with that person is crucial, right? So this is a constant effort, wherein this is a constant struggle that even guys, even podcasters face. We all are humans, end of the day, right? But making sure that creating a value, and working with these guys is what it is. That's the first thing. A few podcasts that I do like, when I started off my podcasting, Lewis House, The School of Greatness, that's amazing. Then Tim Ferriss podcast. Tim Ferriss, amazing guy. Gary V, Tom Bilyeu,
Love it.
and Jay Shetty. Though I don't listen to them a lot now because my time basically goes off in creating my own content, which is a good thing, right? It's good to be a creator than just be a consumer. So yeah, these are, if you ask me, these are five I used to listen, and at times when I feel like listening to some other podcast, I reach out to those guys.
Right. I mean, these are fabulous ones. I listen to a few of them myself as well. Gary Vee, one of my
Yeah,
favorites.
yeah.
Uh, any specific women-hosted podcast that you recommend?
Women. So there was Rachel Hollis, if I'm not wrong. Rachel Hollis. She has a podcast, amazing podcast. Then there was, I forgot the name. There's an Indian podcaster, Swati, I think. I'm not sure. So what she does is she only interviews women entrepreneurs. So I like that kind of. Though I've not listened to a lot of her episodes, but I've just heard from some of my podcasting hosts and podcast friends that no, she also does nice work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because I believe that, in every medium out there, there should be equal gender representation.
definitely,
A little bit from the topic. And
definitely.
podcasting is relatively a newer one. So I think there should be, equal mention of, let's say, women hosting podcasts as well as women guests, right? I do listen to a lot of your podcasts as well, so would be great to hear from more women leaders as well.
True. Yeah, I am in words with a lot of women leaders as well, in terms of getting, collaborating with them and getting it out. Because end of the day, for me, it's not about gender. I don't consider gender at all a possibility. It could be a person who's a gay, who's anybody, like male, female. What really matters is the kind of message you want to give out. If you have a
Right.
great message, if you are open to collaborating, then I'm a person who would definitely collaborate and spread that message out. That's my goal end of the day. So yeah, I would say women also should come forward and start podcasting, because this is not just these any opportunities that men have, all the women have out there. It's all about you coming in forward. So there was this interview that I did with a woman, Shed Zaharai. Okay, so
Mhm.
she is Australian's Forbes listed amazing entrepreneur. She basically teaches women on how to be a better entrepreneur, how to start their business. So when I got her on my podcast, she basically discussed practical things that why women are not coming forward, and what they can do to come forward and also succeed in whatever industries that or whatever field they're going in. So I would say surround yourself with these leaders, thought leaders, so that you, because see, as a woman today, as an Indian society, again, it's not something that while I was talking to Kamya Chani, right, the founder of Curly Tales, so she told me that sometimes, Irshad, balancing professional and personal life becomes a problem, right? If you are too working towards your focus is mainly towards your work, people say that you're not concentrating at home. See, and she said it's a choice, right? It's a
I
choice all of us have to make.
that. I completely understand that, but my request to the podcasting industry as well is that look at equal representation, because I think
Exactly.
huge role in making sure there is a gender balance in the kind of news that they report, right, or the
100.
representation that they bring out for a particular community. Yeah,
True.
and that is a conscious decision that every media house or every medium makes. Yeah, uh,
Exactly.
that's just about that, right? Okay,
No,
another
that's very important.
sorry, another question from our viewer.
Mhm.
It's very difficult to find contact details of podcasters. So, while you guys are present on a lot of social media networks, what is your preferred medium of getting in touch or allowing people to get in touch with you,
Yeah. So
especially?
see, yeah, makes sense. See, it depends from a person to person what kind of medium they like to use more. I'm somebody who, as of today, I am mostly available at two different platforms, wherein I'm really active on those. Instagram. So when people DM me directly, I connect with them. I follow them so that I can understand what kind of PR agency it is, what kind of work they are doing, so that if I envision any collaborations with them, because there have come instances where PR agencies reach out to me, and maybe where my moral, or I would say what message I want to give out, maybe does not resonate the same. And there are some that actually resonate, and I can reach out to those guys directly when they DM me or saying, you guys are doing amazing work. If you have somebody, a thought leader that you're working with, let me know. Like, I'm more than happy to collaborate on those terms. So I would say Instagram, for me, that works if you want to reach out. And LinkedIn, again, is a very great platform. So Instagram and LinkedIn, that is, those are some really good platforms.
Okay, so on that note, we are actually running out of time. So last
Yes,
question of
sure.
uh, your parting shots or best takeaways from the session, from this session for the entire PR community.
Hmm. So guys, I'm telling you, this is gonna be big. Okay. See, there are two kinds of people on the planet. People who are early adapters, who are gonna win, not today, but after 5 or 10 years, and people then who follow the crowd, right? So the PR agencies that are understanding, or who are early adopters, are gonna win in the long run, in the 5 or 10 years from now, when podcasting becomes a big thing, and when the podcaster hosts become the thought leaders for tomorrow, they can push your brand, your PR agency to the next level. Because when you collaborate with some highly influencers, you will be able to push this to the next level, and your company, your brand, to the next level. That is all of us want, right? So adapt to things that are really coming forward. Podcasting is gonna grow, as I said, 58% every year, growing 20 million listeners every year, is gonna be big in the next decade. and everybody in the world is going to be using it. For instance, you look at US, right? Today, the maximum people who listen to podcasts are in the US. There are 63 million people who listen to podcasts in the US. And if you
Right.
look at the population, they are not even that much. How compared to India? We are 130, 1.3 billion people listening. Imagine the kind of exposure we are gonna have. So PR
Hmm.
agencies, if you get the right, maybe it could be starting your own podcast. For me, it's not like reach out to me, reach out to anybody who think you resonate with, because end of the day, it's just not
Right.
one time interview. It's gonna be more than building a relationship with that podcast host or that podcast, so that you guys can come together and help each other grow. That is what's gonna make an impact. So podcast is gonna be big. I'm telling again, don't miss out on the early opportunities when there is a chance, because after that everybody would run to podcasters and podcasters would not have time. After that, it's going to be very really difficult for people to get hold of, irrespective of how amazing the PR agency or the podcast is. If they don't have time, nobody can work together, right? So right now is a great time to collaborate with podcasters, and the kind of result you're going to get is going to be better than what you see in ads or radio ads. It's going to be way more higher. Engagement is going to be higher. Yeah.
Great. So on that note, we'll end the session today with Irshad. Thank you, Irshad, so much for taking all the time to
My
speak.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate all the insights you shared, and I'm sure the PR community will greatly benefit from all of it. And I'm hoping that a lot of them will register for the podcast course that you have in mind. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ranjit. And guys, take care, and let's create a better world.
So, guys, that was Silawath Irshad, host of the Growth Mindset podcast, talking to us about podcasting and PR. I hope this session will help you understand more on how to leverage podcasts and showcase the medium in your PR mix. Thank you to our media partners at Gully and to all of you for joining us today. So, that's all from us today at PRPOI. See you next Saturday for the next live.